Hi, I'm Dan. I work on AdSense in London. And really, my story today is about how we just relaunched AdSense in material design. So Google itself, right, we make a lot of ad-focused products. You probably don't realize this unless your living in some way depends on ads, or you. But actually, like, a lot of ads-focused products. And we put up some logos earlier of products that use Dart, but that's not the whole story within ads, right? I just found like a random set of icons and pulled out the ones that I knew were from ads. And I bet like none of you can name more than 2 of these, right? I would struggle. And but this is important to us, obviously, because this is where the bulk of Google's revenue comes from. Yeah, so AdSense itself is the yellow and blue diagonal lines there, right? That's us in London. And this is one of Google's oldest ads products. I think it was the second ads product at Google after AdWords. So AdWords is where the money comes in. AdSense is where we pay people to show those adverts, right? We've been going for 13 years, and for the last 7 or 8 years, we've been in London. In 2015, AdSense itself paid out $10 billion to AdSense publishers. So this is all websites, people who own websites, small and medium businesses, and they depend for their income on AdSense in some way. But yeah, that's great. Like, why do you care? You're at the Dart Dev Summit. You're not here to hear about advertising. The good news is we just launched a material design UI written in Dart and Angular 2, and that's what I'm going to talk about today. So this is a screenshot of what we launched, but I'll do a quick demo. So what you're seeing here is the UI that we've replaced over the course of the last year. And so if I press the try the new AdSense button, what you saw there was a splash screen that I stole from AdWords. And so what you're now seeing is a UI. What you were seeing before was written in Git. What you're seeing now is written in Dart and Angular 2 completely, everything on screen. And a lot of this is using the material design components that Ted just talked about. And so, yeah, what we've got is like an actual step change in UX quality on AdSense. One of those quotes that Ted talked about said that we were infinitely better because of all these lovely animations, and you can see this big blue bubble, as we call it, that is part of the onboarding flow. But like just moving around the UI, you can see there's lots of nice animations when you're dragging and dropping. Yeah, and this is all really made possible by the material design components that Ted was just talking about. We'll come back to this in a second. So in AdSense, we've been experimenting with Dart for about 2.5 years now. It started out as a very small pilot project, just me and a few others. And over the last year, about a year ago, we started designing what you just saw, the material design UI. And then we started to implement it in January and February. So the story here is about how much productivity has improved, right? We were able to do all of that you just saw within 8 months, basically. After the pilot, so we did a pilot project a few years ago, and then last summer we asked for teams to start using Dart within AdSense. And actually, when we presented the results from our pilot project and showed the productivity improvements that we were able to see, the edit refresh cycles, the UI changes that we were able to make, we struggled to cope with demand from other teams in AdSense, right? So other tech leads in London came to me asking to write their features in Dart, and like my small team that have been building this pilot project, we really struggled to cope with this like scaling to so many people at once. We discovered a lot of bugs in the things that we built, but it was like a good problem to have, right? So in London, we have about 100 people working on AdSense. Over the course of the last year, pretty much everything that we're writing is now in Dart, like every new feature. And so on any given week, I think about 25 people in London are writing and committing Dart, using all the stuff that we've been talking about today. The 2x improvement was mentioned during the keynote, but that tech leads in London are also estimating that the products that they're shipping using this tech stack, we're doing this 2 times more quickly than we were able to with our old tech stack. And really, I've seen that myself with the material design launch. Like, it's just infeasible to have done what we did before we were using Dart. Why is that? Again, so just recapping stuff from the keynote, Dart itself is very terse, it's concise, so you get to write more code. It takes less time to write something in Dart than it would in the old way of doing things, and we'll talk about what the old way was soon. The edit refresh cycle is much, much quicker for us. And really, this was the killer when I was doing demos of the pilot project, and the proof of concept was like, look, I can save a file, and then it's there in the browser a few seconds later. And like this was really the killer feature for us. And also, this move to Dart, because we're moving to a completely different tech stack, this has given us a chance to reimagine the application architecture, which has also meant that we can design for productivity from the start. And then one final thing is like testing got much quicker. I've cropped out like the labels and numbers on this chart because because they're internal, but also they're embarrassing. And the orange bar is a UI component that we wrote in Gwt, and it's the time taken to run the Gwt tests. And the white bar is the same UI component reskinned and re-implemented in Dart for material design, and that's the testing time. And again, this was part of the results we presented to people. It's part of the reason they wanted to use Dart. Happy engineers ship better products more quickly. That's the overall goal, right? So by using Dart, people are happier. They can write and check their code more quickly, and so it's more fun for them. But actually, if you're able to see your changes more quickly in the browser, this results in a better product because it's not so painful to change something, right? If it takes a minute or two to see the result of saving a file, then you're not going to make many changes. And actually what we're seeing is that the UIs we're shipping now are more consistent, they're more user-friendly, they're more polished. So I've worked in AdSense for nearly 6 years now. And this is, I think, the 4th time that we've rebranded the AdSense UI in some way. So let's go back to 6 years ago when I started. We'd been working for a couple of years at that point, when I joined the team, on replacing this, which is internally was called AdSense 2. This was written as using servlets and something very similar to Java server pages. There's very little JavaScript on that page. It's not interactive. It just does page reloads when you click on something. And then, as I joined, we launched this Gwt application. So Gwt is the Google Web Toolkit. It lets you write your UIs in Java and compile them to JavaScript. But what we're seeing is a single-page application, which we would now consider the norm. But obviously, so it's all driven by JavaScript. Clicking on things is interactive. Obviously, it's still not very pretty, but 5 years ago, this was obviously a big improvement for AdSense users. About 3 years ago, we rebranded to this UI, which is in the Kennedy design language, as we called it internally. So we reskinned things, we rewrote a few things. But broadly speaking, this is the same code base as what you saw previously. It's just that we've made it look prettier. So actually, in the material design UI, the bit that I showed you is written in Dart, but most of it is still written in Gwt. So if I actually click, we don't have the beautiful performance of AdWords quite yet, but if I click on performance reports, what you see here is the main reporting UI in AdSense, and this is still all written in Gwt. So we actually have 2 applications running on the page at the same time now. We have the shell, the material design menus all written in Dart, and this Gwt UI running on the same page, and they're communicating with each other. And so why have we done that? Sorry, I got the order wrong. Let's talk about Gwt for a bit. It's served us well for 6 years, right? So over the last 6 years, we've done most of our development in Gwt, and it's gone pretty well for the most part. I don't want to paint it in this horrible light. It's actually like I was a Gwt expert when I joined the team, and I really loved it for a long time. Why did we use Gwt for so long? We loved that it gave us the ability to work in a very large code base. It scales very well because it's Java. It's designed for use by large teams on large products. Static types, we get code sharing. So these are properties that Gwt gave us. They're also properties that Dart gave us, which is why it was like an easy transition to sell to the team. But over the course of 6 years, when you've got hundreds of people contributing to the code base, cruft tends to creep in. People leave the team, people join. It's impossible to understand an application of that size completely. So, things just gradually get worse over time, and this is the story of many large software projects, right? Things are unnecessarily verbose. There's too much code to do something simple. The workflow is gradually slowed down a lot. It takes a couple of minutes to see your changes when you save files. And the RPC mechanism that we were using was actually emulating Java's serialization, which means that you have to compile your backend and your front end at the same time. So doing releases is naturally fragile. You force the user to refresh the page if they've got it loaded while you're doing a release. Now, if I went and talked to the Gwt team and said we're having these problems, they would say that these are all solvable in modern Gwt. There's Java 8, there's super dev mode, we can change the RPC serialization, but actually there's bigger architectural problems that we wanted to solve as well. So the need to move to material design, which is like the new Google UI language, design language, gave us a chance to rethink some of our fundamental decisions. So we redesigned the product to address long-standing UI issues, but also it gave us a chance to solve architectural issues in the code base. And actually, because we felt this need to re-architect the application, it gave us a chance to think again about technologies. And AdWords, we're using Dart. The Dart team itself were pushing quite hard for new customers, and they were very responsive to what we were saying. And also Angular itself, Angular is a big change if you're used to writing UI code before Angular, not having to wire up all your data bindings and your events and all that kind of stuff. So we decided to move. So what did this mean? So we actually had a single Gwt application at the time, being worked on by lots of people at once, and this caused big productivity issues, right? When you make a change, you have to load the code for the entire AdSense code base and push it into the browser. So this gives you big productivity issues. You have to compile everything at once, you have to ship everything at once, you have to QA everything at once. So this is a pretty high-level diagram of what we did, but on the left you can see we've got a very large application written in Gwt, and now we have multiple applications that are much smaller on the same page talking to each other. I can't go into too much of the details, but these applications theoretically could be written in any language. We've got Gwt and Dart, and then on the same page there's a simple event bus that they use to communicate with each other. It's basically publish, subscribe, kind of design pattern. So when we were making these decisions, what were the trade-offs for us? We really wanted to improve the development cycle. This was a big source of unhappiness within the team. So this new architecture means that when you're developing, say, that bit of reporting UI, you don't need to load the entire AdSense code base. So there's just less work to do before you can see the page. But it also means that the team that owns the reporting UI doesn't need to talk to the team that owns the settings UI. And theoretically, they can actually ship their applications at different times. By making smaller applications, we also reduced the amount of code that you have to download when a user loads the page, right? So actually showing the home page takes much less code. We took about 1 megabyte off the initial page load with this move to the new architecture. The downsides of this are actually if you go and click around in everything and load every single possible piece of code, you end up paying more bandwidth costs. And why is that? It's because if you have multiple Dart applications on the same page, you end up re-downloading parts of the SDK over and over again, right? But what we see is that usage patterns for our application are that 90% of users just load the home page and then go and do something else. So optimizing for that initial payload actually works well for us. And the other downside is that it complicates the interactions between those apps. When it's in a single code base, you can do refactoring and know that it applies to everyone at once. If all of these apps are shipping at different times, then you need to be aware of breaking changes in your APIs and make sure that you're backwards compatible. And one of the ways that we manage this is using protocol buffers, which is a backwards compatible serialization. So when you add a field to protocol buffer, it doesn't break people who've got an out-of-date definition. But But yeah, so there's all these kind of tricks. We've added some complexity by making more applications, but actually it buys us a lot in terms of productivity and the initial page load. One of the things that this has let us do is it's let us make changes and ship new binaries every single day. And like part of the move is that this has let us write more automated tests, right? So before, with the single application, we had to write a lot of tests that compiled everything. And like for the local development, you had to compile everything and run your tests against the entire code base at once. By having smaller applications, we can test them in isolation and have fewer like global integration tests. And one of the side effects of that is it's made it possible for us to ship new versions of the UI every day because we have way more automated tests. But you're here to hear about Dart. So what has Dart given us that let us do this? So this is Dart and Angular. The quick page refreshes, which I keep coming back to, but it's actually like a killer for us. The concise code means that not only are you refreshing the page more quickly, but it takes less time to get to the point where you're ready to refresh the page. The faster tests, obviously, like if you're sat around waiting minutes for tests, then this will slow you down. You go away and do something else, and you lose the context of what you're working on. And then code sharing across Google and refactoring. These are things that we had with Gwit, but we also still have with Dart because there are so many teams internally using Dart. Dan Grove mentioned earlier that at Google, we have one large code base that everyone contributes to across the whole company. So if you change a common component in a breaking way, you also have to update your users all at once. And this is kind of impossible unless you've got very good static analysis tools and refactoring tools to make sure that you don't kill people when, break people when, when you make a breaking change. So those were the things we liked about, so code sharing and refactoring were the things that we liked about Gwit, and we still have them with Dart, so that's really great. And then also we have these wonderful open source material design components that Ted has just talked to you about. And just to illustrate that, if we go back to this screenshot from earlier, actually all over the place on this page, we're using things that are in that component set. The icons all come for free. CSS is standard across all of these applications. So like, just simple things like font sizes and spacing are all standard. If we dropped one of these components into AdWords or to Google Fiber, then the spacing would be similar, right? Everything would just match. It would be obvious that this is from the same company using similar stuff. So it's not just UI components either. Like internally, we've got a lot of infrastructure that people like Ted have worked on. And so we get a lot of benefit and we get to move more quickly just by using all this stuff. We have great performance data coming from those automated tests, but we also have great performance data coming from our users. Like we can tell how this code performs in a real application, in a real user's computer, and so we can do very large-scale analysis of how these things are performing and solve those kind of issues preemptively. Things like the logging infrastructure and the RPC mechanisms, they're all standard and shared within Google. Integration testing frameworks, and then finally like the development environment, which you've heard a lot about today, the Dart Analyzer, Strong Mode, Dev Tools, all that kind of stuff we're using, and like now you're able to use it too. So like the message of this talk is actually that we've been using all this stuff that people have been building, and now that is being made available to you. So like we've enjoyed massive benefits compared to what we had previously a few years ago. And so yeah, you can do this too now. That's the message of today, I guess, is that all of these tools that we've been building are now available to you. Thank you very much.